Welcome to The Explainer. If you really want to understand Vladimir Putin, you've got to go way beyond the headlines. We need to get inside his head, right? So we're going to dig into the key moments and the forces that built the mind of, well, one of the most consequential leaders on the planet today.
So, this quote. This is the story Putin himself tells to explain who he is. It's a lesson, he says, he learned back in a rundown apartment building in Leningrad. The story goes, he cornered a rat, and that little creature, terrified, just lunged at him. For Putin, this was a huge moment. It taught him something he never forgot. If you're trapped, you don't surrender. You attack. The hunter can never let himself become the hunted.
So how does a boy chasing rats in a stairwell become that guy? You know, one of the most powerful people in the world? Well, if we want to get a handle on his actions today, everything from his cold calculations to what looks like just pure recklessness, we have to dig into the psychology built over his entire life. In that story, it doesn't start with power. It starts with the wounds that made him who he is.
Okay, so let's start with the wounds. Putin was born into a world that was just steeped in loss and survival. And even though he wasn't there for the worst of it, the trauma his family went through, well, it was like the very air he breathed from the moment he was born.
Get this, before he was even born in 1952, his parents had already buried two other sons. Albert died as a baby before the war. Then Victor, he died of diphtheria during the siege of Leningrad. He was buried in one of 186 mass graves, graves that hold 500,000 people. So Vladimir grew up an only child. Yeah, but he was always living in the shadow of these two ghosts.
And the family trauma gets even more intense. During that same brutal siege of Leningrad, his mother, Maria, actually collapsed from starvation. She was mistaken for dead and literally loaded onto a cart with a pile of corpses. It was his father, wounded and home from the front, who found her. He refused to believe she was gone and basically saved her from being buried alive in a mass grave. I mean, can you even imagine?
And his father's story? It's just as insane. He was in an NKVD sabotage squad. Out of 27 guys in his unit, only 3 made it out alive. He survived by hiding underwater, breathing through a reed while German soldiers were right there looking for him. So this is a man shaped by incredible violence, and unfortunately, he brought that violence home. He used to beat young Vladimir with a belt.
You know, psychologists actually have a name for kids born into a situation like this. They're called replacement children. Think about the pressure. They carry this huge, unspoken weight on their shoulders, this need to justify their own existence, to make up for their parents' incredible loss. And what that often does is create what they call a false self. You know, this tough, larger-than-life personality on the outside that's really just protecting someone deeply hurt and insecure on the inside.
And it gets even more interesting. Political psychologists have put together these checklists, right? Factors in childhood that often point to narcissistic traits in leaders later on. And when you look at Putin's childhood, I mean the replacement child thing, the deprivation, the violence at home, he checks pretty much every single box. It's a textbook case.
So all that trauma at home, it was basically reinforced by what was happening out on the streets. Post-war Leningrad was no joke. Putin was a small kid and he got picked on, beaten up. So he learned this brutal street code. Compromise is for the weak. The only way you survive is to make everyone think you're a little bit crazy, that you're capable of anything. And like he says, you always have to strike first.
Okay, so with that kind of worldview, where do you go? Well, for Putin, the answer was the KGB. As a teenager, he was already looking for a place that could take all those survival instincts and turn them into a weapon. The story is, he just walked into a KGB office and asked, "How do I join?" And the KGB, it didn't just give him a job. It gave all those wounds, all that trauma, a purpose.
And this brings us to a really crucial point from analyst Fiona Hill. She says the most important thing to understand about Putin is this identity, the case officer. Think of it like his core programming, his mental operating system. It's not just a job he used to have. No, it's the lens he uses to see everything and everyone in the world.
So you see, the KGB didn't fix his childhood trauma. It did the opposite. It basically gave it a uniform and a mission. That constant watchfulness he learned from his parents, that became a job requirement. That it's me or you logic from the street, that became Cold War strategy. And being paranoid, that wasn't a bug. It was a feature. It was a professional skill.
And then there's this one moment that just locks everything in. The Berlin Wall is falling. An angry crowd is surrounding his KGB office in Dresden. He and his buddies are inside, frantically burning secret documents. He calls for backup from the local Soviet military base, and they tell him, "Sorry, we can't do anything without orders from Moscow." And then he gets this chilling message back. Moscow is silent. In that moment, the entire Soviet state just evaporated. It abandoned him, leaving him completely alone and defenseless. That feeling never left him.
So we have the childhood wounds and the KGB training. But there's a third, final layer to his psychology. And this one wasn't forged in the past. It's about the corrosive effect of having immense power. And what's wild is that neuroscience actually shows us that unchecked power can physically change your brain. It acts a lot like an addictive drug.
Lord David Owen, who's both a neurologist and a former politician, actually gave this a name, hubris syndrome. The key thing here is that you're not born with it. You get it from having power for a long time. It messes with your judgment, makes you terrible at judging risk, and can make you see yourself as some kind of savior. Basically, power floods your brain with dopamine, you get addicted to it, and you start making really bad calls.
And with Putin, you can literally see this change over the years. Think about the guy who took power back in 2000. He was cautious, pragmatic, a real calculator. Now, he seems much more isolated, more impulsive. After more than 20 years of absolute power, surrounded by people who are probably afraid to tell him no, yeah, he's showing all the classic signs of hubris syndrome.
All right, so let's put it all together. You take these three huge layers, the deep wounds from childhood, the cold-blooded KGB training, and the brain-altering effects of power, and what do you get? You get a psychological blueprint, one that makes his actions, in a weird way, dangerously predictable.
So here's the blueprint, right? You've got the replacement child needing to prove he deserved to live. You've got the tough guy act covering up massive insecurity. The Street Fighter belief that violence is the only thing that really works. The KGB agent's paranoia turned into a professional skill. That deep, deep fear of the state collapsing and leaving him alone again. And on top of all that, a brain literally rewired by decades of power. When your mind is built like that, compromise feels like death. Retreat feels even worse.
And that leaves us with this final, pretty chilling idea from Fiona Hill, one of the top experts on this. She says, every time you think, no, he wouldn't do that, would he? The answer is, yes, he would. His actions might not be irrational at all. They might be terrifyingly logical, but only if you're looking at the world from inside his head, a world built on trauma, suspicion, and that core belief he learned as a boy in that Leningrad stairwell that a cornered rat has no choice but to attack.